Hello, my name is Connor Gardner, and this is a brief video walkthrough of a personal project that I made within the programming language Kotlin. Now, this program was developed under the premise of wanting to develop an Android application, and this is best done within Android Studio. And so with that being said, I wanted to create a basic application that could allow me or encourage me to learn some of the basic syntax as well as different usage cases of how Kotlin is integrated and formally developed in an Android space. One of my outcomes or goals was I wanted to keep it simple, but build something that I could relate to. So I built a task managing app, as I love the emphasis that can be placed on prioritizing the things that we want to do or eventually become in life. And what better way to do that than to formulate a plan in which we can streamline that process? And so I've done this with an application that I've called Simplify. Now, the purpose of Simplify is to enable a user to identify basic tasks that need to be completed within their life. Secondly, introducing a studying tactic that I love and admire, which is known as the pomodoro effect, which basically enables a user to set 20 to 25-minute intervals of time in which they are solely dedicated to the task that they want to accomplish. And after that 25-minute workflow is completed, they take a 5-minute break. And the purpose of doing this is it isolates the time that we spend on our tasks. More so with the studies that have been done, and there's a lot of professional studies that back up this report, but it encourages your workflows to become more efficient. It encourages better retention of information that is learned, and the overall outcomes are perfect in the sense that instead of brute forcing material and trying to cram studying in perhaps the traditional sense that someone would in the real world, some of the different tools that I had mentioned that were used within this program were, of course, the Android Studio platform or IDE. I also used Kotlin, of course, and some other dependency libraries, and Gemini for some basic troubleshooting with syntax. As listed within this README, we also have some useful websites with different research methodologies that were used while I was trying to understand how Kotlin works and, again, how it's integrated. And as well, last but not least, some of the future work that I would like to eventually integrate into a project such as this. Things that could make it more efficient and more user-friendly for a wide user base. Now, with that in mind, let's jump into the Android Studio environment and let's go through some code. Alrighty, now that we are set up within our Android Studio environment, I just want to briefly mention that this is currently being remote shelled or remote desktoped in via the Google Chrome application. The reason for this being is Android Studio is just very performance heavy. My local machine isn't able to run it very well, and even my desktop, which is currently being showcased again here, still has a lot of different performance issues. This could be related to restrictions within Java/Kotlin itself, or even more so how, as a beginner, I have developed this application. So I just want to have that out front, just so that we're aware of that. But with that being said, I'm going to go over a couple of different components of Android Studio, and then we're going to actually emulate and run this application and showcase what it actually looks like, what the code itself has done, and what the overall objective has been with this application called Simplify. Alrighty, just to give a brief simplified rundown of how the file structure itself is organized within Kotlin, I'm just going to take the opportunity to do so right now. First and foremost, we have our app. It's the app file, which essentially allows us to house all of our different individual components that are specifically built within language Kotlin. So for example, just to give a brief rundown of how this is set up, we have our Android manifest, which is essentially our blueprint for how the application itself is built out. And one of the most important files actually within our Android manifest is our main activity. And we'll go over that in just a second. But moving on to our Kotlin and Java folder, this houses everything that is related to our simplified tasks program, starting with our model, as well as our UI. Within our UI, we have our navigation, our screens, our theme, our view model, and our main activity. But going into our model itself, this is basically just a data class. Our data class houses a couple of different variables. We have our ID, our title, and if the task itself is done. And this is further integrated within our main task as well as within our screens. But moving on to our UI is essentially our user interface, as the name implies, and this has been broken down into two different viewable windows. We have our tasks, our timer, and our third one, which is currently just not working due to some performance constraints, is our pomodoro effect. And our pomodoro effect essentially houses some information about how the studying method is effective, as well as some different recommendations and elements for how it could be utilized within the future. Our timer screen essentially houses a clock. There's three different buttons: our start, pause, and end. And at the end of that, this timer is preset to 25 minutes, which meets the requirements of a typical Pomodoro effect studying session or work session. And moving on to our last one, we have our tasks. And within our tasks file, we have a couple of different elements. We have a section that allows us to input text so that we can specify what these tasks are. The tasks then are rendered in a list format, which is composed within checklist boxes that allows us to go through and mark off tasks that have been completed. Moving on to the next section, though, of our application, we have our screens. As previously mentioned, the Pomodoro Effect screen, currently due to performance issues that I've been experiencing with my desktop or machine, it just hasn't been working, so we're limited to just two for this demonstration. We have our task screen. Now, our task screen, as previously mentioned, it allows us to create new tasks, which we see here. Within those tasks, those can be added within a text box, which has been created over in here. Essentially, the way that this is broken down in this file, we have our elements that are visual elements, which are safeguarded and created within here. This essentially outlines like the different conditions in which our display window will be rendered, as well as how those elements themselves, logic-wise, are configured. Moving on to our timer screen, though, we have our clock, and our clock is transposed with some very simple logic here. As we see here, we want to have our Pomodoro FX sessions limited to just 25 minutes. And the preset for our timer is set and conditional to 25-minute sessions. The reason for this being is this is atypically the longest duration in time in which someone can be sub-focused for a studying session such as this. And this is how you maximize the flow of how you distribute your workflows. Moving on into a couple of different elements within our code here, as we see for our timer screen, we have a couple of different var elements that store our time and our time left, as well as we see here again, for the bottom part of this section, we have some different buttons. We have our pause button, we have our start button, and we have our end button with logic inserted here to showcase that. Moving on to the next section, though, we have our theme. Our theme basically houses all the visual elements, at least in terms of color, primarily for our application and how those are distributed, similar to how you would see on a website. Now, moving on to the next section, we have our view model. Our view model essentially allows us to render different aspects of, of our task screen, and we have a couple of different logic indicators that are inserted in here to streamline how that is done. Now, within the last section here within our app, we have our view model. Now, our view model basically just houses the logic for our task screen components, specifically so that when we're adding and marking tasks and even removing them, this is the process of doing that. And we also have our imported dependencies that allow us to do this within this specific screen, our task screen. Now, moving on to two different and last components or sections of the Kotlin library or the Android Studio library. We have res. This is where all of our viewable elements are housed. We have, for example, different backgrounds that we can house specifically for our launcher. By default, these are just some of the default parameters that are used for the dev environment. Of course, you have Android Green and the Android logo itself. Now, moving on to our last section, we have our Gradle scripts. Our Gradle scripts essentially allow us or enable us to compile our Android application. everything from the Android manifest to the different individual elements that were showcased here. It all is handled by our module for our app. And this is, of course, something that has to be robustly made and configured correctly and concisely. Otherwise, individual components will be broken down. Now, for the last part of this tutorial, I'm just going to briefly go through the emulation process and showcase from our logcat how this works and things that we should watch out for, and also just how performance intensive this application can be. So we start our runtime. Gradle is, of course, building our app. It loads right up. And this process of compiling all the different components and dependencies within our Gradle file itself do take some time. It looks like we do have a couple of different issues that we are experiencing. Alrighty. Now that our application is fully rendered, it looks like there were some major performance restraints. With this in mind, though, this is what our application looks like. This is our home screen. This is what it loads up into. This is simplified tasks. And this is our text box that allows us to insert different tasks that we may want to accomplish. So let's say, for example, we were going through a different subset of tasks that we wanted to get done during the course of a day. Or, for example, within a Pomodoro session. Let's say we had math homework. So let's say we needed to study logarithms. So we put study logarithms. Let's say in conjunction with that, one of the other things that we need to complete for the day is we need to study our study Anki flashcards. Now let's say one of the last things that we wanted to get done for the day is give flowers to our wife. Yeah, those are 3 great tasks that we could accomplish. And so if we wanted to use our timer, for example, we could come in here and start our timer, which initiates our session. Once our session is, of course, initiated, we'll come over here and we'll start one of our tasks that we want to get done. Now let's say that we're done with our task. Let's say that we've studied our logarithms, we've studied our Anki flashcards, and somehow within 25 minutes of time, we've also given flowers to our wife. We could come in here, and this is one of the aspects of this app that is currently not working, but I'm just showcasing it here, as this is something that I'll need to fix in the future, is the timer itself will only run when it is currently within window. And I think that there are a lot of different components that need to run concurrently with this within this environment. And this is one of those that is currently not working. However, going back to our task list, if we wanted to clear the session, we could delete all of these different tasks. In addition to that, though, as previously mentioned, our Pomodoro effect screen is not working. I have rendered it within both our app nav graph and our Pomodoro effect screen that it's just not going to compile at all. And if we were to click this, for example, and you'll see this eventually within our logcat, which again showcases different components that have been accessed or things that have been done within our application. Again, from a development standpoint, this is a great way to identify any errors that may hinder the performance of an application, as well as all the different elements that go into this process, which is pretty substantial. If we were to click our Pomodoro effect, though, this would force close the application and render it useless. With that being said, this is Simplified Tasks. This is a brief video tutorial walkthrough of how an application can be developed within Kotlin. I hope you enjoy the video. Thank you.